So this is exciting. I get to introduce the Richard Louv Innovation Award today, and I'll start by saying I think everyone in this room remembers 2005, or at least knows the book, Last Child in the Woods. You just spoke, he knew, about your son in the woods. Richard Louv gave voice to each of us for something that many of us had worried about for the longest of times. What's going on with children? Rich coined that phrase, nature deficit disorder. And as you know, he's quick to say always, that's not a medical diagnosis. It's a description of changes in society. So that was 2005 when Last Child in the Woods was published. I met Rich in November of 2005, and he said, Cheryl, we need a new nonprofit. I said, what, another 501c3? I'm not so sure we need yet one more of those. And he said, no, this will be different. Our only purpose is to reconnect children with nature for their own health and well-being and that of the earth itself. So in 2006, a small group of us, Rich, me, Mike Perchuk, Amy Perchuk, Marty Erickson, and Martin LeBlanc, we were the first board for the Children and Nature Network. We could not be more thrilled than we are to see the progress, to commend the current board, the current leadership. We're just thrilled to see all of you here. In 2022, the board and leadership of the Children and Nature Network decided to create the Richard Louv Award for Innovation in Nature Connection. And made a commitment to create an award that would be substantial. So that's a $15,000 prize to the recipient of the award. We're now in the third year of that commemoration. An acknowledgement of Rich's leadership that we're grateful for every day, but a statement of commitment and belief in the work that each of you is doing and many others throughout the world. So I could not be, again, more delighted that this work continues. Our first recipient for the Richard Louv Award in 2022 was Atia Wells, a relatively young pediatric nurse from Baltimore who looked around in her neighborhood with her young family, her husband and children, and said, there's no place to play. There's no place to grow food. We have to do something about this. And she did. And Bliss Farm was created. I'm on their mailing list. It continues to grow and thrive. It's a community gathering place. Absolutely beautiful. The next year, last year, Luis Camargo of Bogota, Colombia, was awarded the prize, the founder of an environmental education and outdoor nonprofit. He has literally himself taken hundreds of thousands of young people, children and youth, outdoors, primarily in wilderness settings. And his work is influencing people throughout South America and beyond, throughout the world. So that's a little bit of background about where we are right now. I would like to ask Rich to come up and give us a few thoughts to help remind us about why we do this. And after Rich speaks for a few moments, then I'll introduce this year's recipient. Okay? Rich, please.
You notice Cheryl emphasized a few moments that I was to speak. She knows I get long-winded. I was moved by Hinou's remarks. I was that kid. I spent much of my boyhood in the woods with my dog, whose name was Banner, and my parents often did not know where I was. Banner always knew where I was. And when I was up to no good, Banner would go home. And my mother would know that Richie is up to no good, and she would come looking for me. And Banner did many great things. He helped me get out of the creek when I went through the ice. But those woods, that time, that sense of largeness, I've been trying to describe ever since. So your son is my sons and me as well. And thank you for those remarks. You also mentioned reciprocity. In the most recent of my tomes, Our Wild Calling, which is about our relationship with other animals, I talk about the reciprocity principle. And let me, if I could read a couple paragraphs. We still have time to recognize and value the intimacy that is all around us, the whispering song of life communicating with itself. It exists in our mitochondria, in the habitat of the heart. Perhaps you first sensed the whisper as a small child when you buried your face in the fur of a dog's neck, or when you were 12 encountering a bull elk on a high ridge, or maybe in midlife as you sat on a park bench and watched a scrub jay watch you, or in your final days, startled by the shadow of an owl you already knew was coming. We can learn to whisper, to turn up volume, to sing within the family of animals. Beyond our individual relationships, our times call for the adoption of a basic principle that embraces both survival and joy as we repair our relationship with the natural world. We might call this the reciprocity principle. For every moment of healing that humans receive from another creature, humans shall provide an equal moment of healing for that animal and its kin. For every acre of wild habitat we take, we will preserve or create at least another acre of wildness. For every dollar we spend on classroom technology, we will spend at least another dollar creating chances for children to connect deeply with another animal, plant, or person. For every day of loneliness we endure, we'll spend a day in communion with the life around us until the loneliness passes away. Earth's environmental crisis isn't just measurable in the number of fires and floods or the inches of rising seawater, but in rising rates of depression and anxiety, some of it attributable to what is now called eco-anxiety, or comes in other terms as well. The work of the Children in Nature Network and its staff, I find just astonishing. Sarah's work, Laura's work, all of your work. You've heard me say before that there are two kinds of people in the world: people who do and people who write about people who do. I'm the latter. And it's so moving to see the growth of the Children in Nature Network and what you accomplish every day. It stands as a kind of contrast to the tragedy and the depression and the sadness we see every day when we read the headlines. It is healing nature. Jason Stout, who works with bereaved children and families that have suffered some major loss in their lives, is carrying on that work of healing. We need hundreds, thousands of Jason Stouts. We need healing. We need compassion. We need empathy. I want to tell you a story. I'll keep it a few minutes. I want to tell you a story. I'm working on an alleged new book, and I went up the mountain that I can see from our front window. My wife and I moved to the mountains east of San Diego a few years ago, and I have the privilege of living in that area. But it's called Vulcan Mountain. I went up the mountain with a guy who had been coming up to that mountain to heal that mountain for many years. That mountain, along with much of the land around where we live, burned twice. in recent decades, beginning in 2003. The fire was so hot that it exploded boulders the size of houses. It scorched the land. It killed the seed beneath the surface. It sterilized much of that mountain. So this guy, who lives far from the mountain, would drive up a couple times a week for years to plant trees. He didn't tell anybody. He just did it. So one day I went up with him on the mountain, and I asked him why, and he couldn't really explain why he did it. But he had for years. But he described to me one day, when he was finished planting the trees he had brought that day, he found himself at the bottom of the mountain in his truck, hunched over the steering wheel, sobbing, because he had suddenly realized that the mountain will burn again. Something so obvious, but he had just not grasped that yet. And the thing is that what he was doing might not survive. Mountains burn again. Tragedy comes again, followed by great bereavement. But during the time that that mountain heals for a while, the life on that mountain will be better for the animals that live there, for the trees that live there. Your work is like that. We may not get there where we want to get. We may not get as many children connected to nature as you all want to connect. But in the meantime, think of the lives that you touch and how much better the lives of those children will be. The guy went up the mountain with, who worked for years and then found himself sobbing over his steering wheel. That was several years ago. The story didn't end then. He's been planting trees ever since. He didn't quit, even though he felt so hopeless. Jason Stout doesn't quit. You don't quit. We don't quit. As sad as things are in many ways today, we don't quit. So don't mourn, plant. Thank you.
So pretty exciting. You're beginning to hear a little more about this year's recipient. Let me add just a bit more information about the process and about this year's Richard Louv Award recipient. There is a committee of the founders of the Children in Nature Network that reviews all the applications and nominations that come in from around the world, and they do. And so we look at those, carefully and thoughtfully, and we think about how meaningful the work is, and we look to see, can it be replicated? Can it inspire others? Can others take that idea and put it to work where they live? Can it be scaled? So this year's recipient has demonstrated that, exemplifies the innovation, the heart and the commitment that underlies it, and its capacity to be a model for others. And in this case, as Rich began to allude, Jason Stout experienced some grief and loss in his own life, and dealing with that, personally felt the power of the natural world to help him heal, but didn't stop with that, and founded something called Heroic Journey, a national outward bound program for young and grieving and at-risk teens in a variety of life circumstances. One of the things that we also noticed, in addition to just the power of the program to help young people and adults as well at a certain point in time, some from military families, some from other families, but everyone experiencing profound grief in their lives, he tried to figure out ways to get additional funding and was able to do that in a couple of ways, more than a couple. Some additional educational funding from AmeriCorps, but one that struck us on the selection committee was those programs that allow, they're called 529 programs, and they allow parents and grandparents and others to put money aside, typically for college education, but in this case was able to get these outward bound like nature-based outdoor experiences qualified for the use of this money. That's a huge innovation and one that we can all find ways to have children and youth benefit from in the years going forward. I mentioned his work with military. He's an advisor to the nature programs. He is an advisor to the Tragedy Assistance Program for survivors. Helped develop healing in nature workshops for hundreds of children, military volunteers, and adults. There's a lot of flexibility to the work that he does. We were unanimous in our decision this year to award him out of more than 80 nominations. So with all of that, we'd really like to invite Jason to come to the stage. Look at this and say a few words.
Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you, Richard Louv, for that book, Last Child in the Woods. I think that was 2006. I think I was about 35 when I read it. And it put words to what we were doing. You know, like it just gave me a way to talk to people and explain why it was so important for us to get out into nature. And that was about the same time I started taking grieving teenagers in the Denver community on 1-week backpacking and rafting trips. All of them sharing that in common they had someone they loved die, or maybe just a person die, right? I got really nervous today to get up here. And this morning, my partner Joelle's here, and she says, I said, aren't you going to tell me to ground myself? She always says, ground yourself, Jason, when I go off. And she's like, nope. She's like, fly high. Today's the day you fly high. I just want to talk a little bit about grief. There is nothing more disruptive in a child's life than the death of a loved one. Nothing more disruptive. It changes their whole entire life right then. It changes the way they see the world. Grief is a lifelong experience. Part of that is because of how it does change the way that child will see the world. Maybe more fatalistic, just always worrying that something's going to happen. I know this because I've worked with so many kids. And I ask them, hey, that's how I felt. Do you feel that way? While we're sitting under a huge ash tree in Fort Myer, Arlington, this last week, and I asked that same question. Hundreds of kids, 5-year-olds, every group I worked with, every age group, the veterans that I work with, the active duty folks, right? Nothing is more disruptive than grief in a child's life, but nothing's more powerful than nature. Nothing is more transformative. From 45-minute workshops to 7-day backpacking trips, all of it is transformative. What's so great about doing this for 23 years is that you see the patterns. You see, you get that feedback. You start to see the shift in a person's eyes. That it kind of tears up and it starts to make sense. It's like they're going home, right? We can't be passive in our healing. That's why kids have to learn that nature is that place they can go. They can walk out the door and take off their shoes and put their feet on the ground, reach out and touch a tree, right? When you only have 45 minutes with a group of kids, it's more like a sales pitch. It's more like you got to get back and bring back that awe, like, wow, this is magic. Look at those trees staring down at us. Years ago, in Leadville, Colorado, at 11,000 feet, had a group of kids, and we were doing this every week in the summer. Thanks to Brian Greasy, who was the Broncos quarterback who funded that, and then later New York Life Foundation, a thank you to them. But second night out there, we'd do a water ceremony, Something you've probably done, right? Something sending messages down a river. Have you ever done that? Beautiful thing. When you have a group of 50 kids sitting at the bottom of Mount Massive, largest mountain in Colorado, mass-wise, and we have a creek running by, and then we all do this thing where we share messages to our loved ones. And then they'll take some water from this big pot that we took from the creek, and they'll pour it into the bowl, and they'll say, Mom, I miss you, I love you. Why did you kill yourself, Bobby? They're sharing it. That's normalizing, right? They're sharing that burden. And I'm not alone in my grief, because grief can be isolating. And when they share those messages down the river, when they pour them in, they circle around. And I've had like 50 kids circle around this creek. And they know that when those messages flow down the creek, they'll hit the Arkansas River at one point. They'll flow down through the canyons, through the mountains, through the desert, and to the ocean to be delivered. I don't think the Arkansas makes it to the ocean anymore, but they use their imaginations, right? But when you get them out, you have 50 kids, and they look at that river or that creek, and their messages are going down, there's 15 minutes of silence. High school kids not saying a word because they're connecting with nature. Second night, they're connecting with the person that died. That's the painful part when we have a person that dies. We feel like they're a million trillion miles away. But when you send messages down a river and you know they're going to be delivered, then you have to kind of guess that maybe they're gone, but the relationship lives on. We climb a mountain, we dedicate it to a person died, 14,000-foot peak, 4:30 in the morning, let's go. And the kids are like, this is a bummer, no, I don't want to do this. But we're dedicating it to the person, your person today. Okay, right? And then they write the name of their loved one, their person on a piece of tape, put it on their boots, put it on their helmets, and then we take off. And it's painful. Has anybody ever climbed a big mountain, a 14,000-foot peak in Colorado? We call them 14ers, right? It's hard, isn't it? So we start going, right? And we're walking, and we're breathing. Grief is in the body, and it's getting out now. They're breathing. And that grief is coming out. A lot of them start crying, right? Something they've been holding in. And we move up that mountain. It takes us hours, and we got to get up before the lightning storms come in. And everybody wants to quit, but they don't. And when you dedicate, there you go again. You're giving a gift to someone. And if you're giving a gift to someone, some sort of relationship still exists. It's called continuing bonds. It's really important in the grief process. We climb that mountain. It takes hours, maybe 6-7 hours. We get to the top. And all the kids, every time we did this, they would just stand around hugging each other, celebrating. They were just like, this is the best place. And they can see over the valley. They can see the Arkansas River that the day before those messages were being sent down, right? They're connecting. They're connecting with each other. There's no distractions. They're just there in their breath, looking out over the mountains, over the valley. And one year we had 2 kids, Joe and Mike. Joe was from Colorado. Mike was from Los Angeles, California. So they get to the top and they decide they're going to yell out to their moms together, right? And looking over this beautiful landscape. After they climbed a mountain all day in honor of their moms, they yell out, I love you, Mom. I miss you, Mom. Together. And then it's silent for about a minute. And then Joe looks at Mike and says, I think they heard us. Right? I can tell you, I've sat in hundreds, thousands of grief groups. That disconnection is the suffering. It's so painful. I'll never see them again, right? Grief is so isolating, it's so alone, but they're together on this mountain. They're feeling connected, like Mom's right there. I myself, after a few years, I was like, Dad, this is for you at the top of the mountain. And I felt this electricity through my veins. In that moment on this mountain, I was like, I felt closer to my dad. It feels weird to say this. I felt closer to my dad than I'd ever been before, even when he was alive. He was there. When we were walking down that mountain, one of the kids says to me, that was the most stressful, stress-relieving experience of my life, right? And I've seen this over and over and over again, and again in 45 minutes. I see kids at night, these are the military kids that I work with, the veterans in the active duty. They get on stage, and we always ask them, the ritual is, hey, what was your favorite part of the day? Healing in nature. Healing in nature, 45 minutes in nature, right? I can tell you this, 100% of you will die. 100% of you will experience the death of someone you love. It is the most universal experience that binds us. But we're afraid to talk about it. We're a pain-avoidant, grief-avoidant culture. And that's why I think, just speaking up here, we have to become more than just trauma-informed. We have to become grief-informed, right? When we can have that courage to step in and have that conversation, tell me what's going on. Are you okay? Of course they're not, but I can tell you this. I can help you right now. If you want some advice on talking to, being with the person that's grieving, here it is. It goes like this. It's not what you say, but how you listen. All right? So I'm going to end this right now. I just want to say that when I was 4, my sister Maria died. She died of hydrocephalus. I dropped her. She had hydrocephalus. I was like her little younger brother, but I would hold on to her and love her. And I was young, but I remember her. But in that moment, I dropped Maria, and my mom says, Jason, what happened? And I'm like, oh, I hurt Maria. And I was panicked. She died a couple months later. And in my little 4-year-old Jason brain, I felt like I was the one responsible. And I carried that around with me. I got older, and I knew that probably wasn't true, but there was some voice in my head that made me feel like I had done something wrong. When I was 7, my grandmother was murdered. I was horrified. I started sucking on my thumb again. I was regressing, and I couldn't sleep at night. I had nightmares. I asked the kids if they feel the same, and they say, oh yeah, we do. How many of you have nightmares? How many of you are afraid of your mom dying now, or your dad? Me. Well, let's talk about it. Out here under a beautiful tree with our shoes off, barefoot, right? And I see some of these pictures down here. It's kind of throwing me off right now. It was a few years later that my dad died. I was 14. And my dad was my best friend. And I suffered so much. I kept it in. It was 2 days later, too, that the Challenger exploded. I thought the world was ending. And I can tell you this, a lot of kids feel that way. A lot of people feel that way because we walk around and we hold it in because we don't feel like we can share it with others because we're in this society that's pain avoidant and grief avoidant. I'm just going to end with this. Thank you very much. This is a movement. Getting connected to nature, the work that we all do together, we are a movement. The Children in Nature Network, it's not just an organization, it's a movement. And here we go, working together, not being afraid, having courage. Again, grief is the most disruptive experience we can have, but nature is the most powerful, transformative medicine and the healthiest without any side effects, except for a few scratches, right? And those are actually good for us. But I just want to say thank you very much. Love you all. Thank you.